Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to not just another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Today is the 100th episode, the big 100th episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. When I
Woohoo!
first started this, it was almost like hard to imagine that we were going to do 100 episodes. Little did I know how much work was going to go into a podcast. But I wanted to make sure that today we were going to do something different and something super special. And when I sat back and thought about who could I bring on that would be really, really special for this 100th episode, it just came so immediate. And that is my partners, Stephanie, Vaughan, and Zach Burkes. Because quite frankly, we never could have even got to this point if it wasn't for the unique talents, the gifts, and most importantly, the hard work that my partners have put with the business and so forth. Really, we lived by this motto of together we're better. And it's we see that showing up every single day, day and night, weekends, you name it. We've really formed something quite special together as a team, and it's something that I felt would be helpful for our listeners if we were pull back the curtain a little bit, talk about partners, why we formed the partnerships, what we found to work with other partnerships, maybe even kind of go into a little bit of the struggles that we've had. So Stephanie and Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you. This is going to be fun.
It
Two
is
of
going to
my
be fun.
favorite people.
Amen. Amen. So, one of the first things that people will often ask me is, do I recommend joining a partnership or having a partnership or getting other people involved and whatnot versus doing it yourself? And I've run businesses, as have my partners, where they've done things themselves and they've had other partners. So anytime we're in business, it's all about putting the probabilities in our favor. And statistically speaking, your chances of getting to $1 million on your own, completely by yourself, is about 0.1%. But when you start bringing in a team, that goes up and multiplies by 4,500%. And those are actual real numbers. So if for nothing else, you were to just look at what can I do to improve the odds of helping my business succeed, it's finding not just any partner, but it's really finding the right partners. And I think one of the things that have become abundantly obvious between the work that I do with Zach and Stephanie is that we're very similar, yet we're very, very different from one another. And a good partnership is much like a marriage. They're saying that opposites attract. And a lot of times when people look at forming these partnerships, they try to find people that are exactly like them. But if we bring on a partner that's exactly like you, one of you are going to be redundant. So in our case, ourselves, we're very different from one another and very much alike. What's alike is our values. But what's different is our skill sets. What Zach brings to the table, what Stephanie brings to the table, we're much like a zipper. Their strengths are my weaknesses are their strengths. And so I'll pass the mic first to Stephanie. When we were originally starting, even talking about this idea of a partnership, um, how did you know that you were making the right decision?
Well, if you remember, we were working together with different projects. So we had the opportunity of working together before, it was really because we worked so well together.
Yeah,
And we began to see this opportunity in front of us because it appeared to us, it was presenting itself that if we worked, that we were stronger in many ways together than we were doing some of the things separate.
yeah,
And so I think that was one of the first times that we started having these conversations like, hmm, maybe we need to look at, some opportunities. So I think as you and I began to explore it, I think one of the things that really helped us start to succeed right out of the gate was that you and I were dirt honest with each other right up front. And I remember we had those conversations, and we would get on a call and we'd be like, okay, what are your concerns? What, put everything out on the table. What are the things that, you are questioning about our partnership? What are some concerns that you might have? What are your absolute diehard things that are important to you? And we dealt with, financial things, and we dealt with, value-based things. And we dealt, like, we talked about all of the things that we just laid our cards out on the table. And I think it was not only the fact that we could come to an agreement and listen to each other, but it was the fact that we were both willing to have the conversation. It's the fact that we were both willing and wanted to get everything out on the table. Because for me, collaboration and being in a team, and I want to enjoy what I do. It's part of my print, which is an assessment tool that we use. And to enjoy whether it's in my life or my professional work, I want to enjoy. I want to be inspired. I want to be motivated, as many of us do.
Yeah.
And when we began talking, I always enjoyed the conversations. I would leave the conversation being inspired. There's people that you talk to or you meet with, and you walk away from the conversation, you were literally like wiping off the slime of just this negativity or toxicity, and you're like, oh, it just doesn't feel good. And I think sometimes we really have to listen to that, also that gut instinct, as well as, the things that fit on paper. It's that feeling that you have when you're working with somebody or you're interacting with somebody. And I just noticed and recognized that every time we'd interact or we'd work together, or we'd work through something, even if it was challenging, that you and I could work through it and we could talk through it openly. And I'd walk away, feeling good about the conversation, even if it was a tough subject or a topic for us to deal with.
So when we introduced this concept of partnerships, I had mentioned that partnerships are a lot like a marriage, right? That
Yeah.
it's the opposites attract, but then there's going to be common values. I guess if we're going to play off that same metaphor, working together earlier was almost like that dating phase, right? Just trying to see,
Hmm.
like testing the water, see how well we could work together. And Zach and I also had that opportunity where we worked together for many different years and got a sense for both the strengths and the weaknesses and whatnot. And Zach, you've had multiple different experiences with partnerships as well. So, um, what did you sort of learn from your past experiences with partnerships and coming into now this experience? And uh, I guess the lessons that you learned from the last ones, the mistakes you were going to make sure you didn't make coming into this one, and other advice for our listeners.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. I was just thinking about that as Stephanie was going through the different conversations. Not to get too far off topic, but I think um, I've always been that type of entrepreneur, or I guess my experience has been this way, where I was like I had a job while I was launching my first company, right? Like I was like all in, but I was still doing other things and trying to figure it out first. And I think that was kind of my approach with this as well, to be candid,
Yeah.
was when I was working with you. We started kind of on a smaller basis, but I think both of you had like reputations that were like really solid and stellar. You've been doing this for a while. Might be a little different if you don't know someone or they don't have that sort of reputation, right? But in past relationships or partnerships, with people, like, so my first company, we were really young, and I think we made a lot of mistakes. Communication wasn't always there. And so it led to a lot of like misunderstandings, miscommunication, and just people being upset and or feeling like they weren't being heard. And so I think that's a big part of it as well, is not only finding people who have like strengths that you don't, and you guys can, complement one another, but just understanding people that, like, if you're going to launch that partnership, you want to be sure that you can have those conversations, you can have that communication, you do feel comfortable in opening up and being vulnerable. Otherwise, I think a lot can be left unsaid and leads to some maybe toxic environments, right? So I think there's something there as well. But yeah, then, leaving that, I had a lot of great experiences, and each time I've kind of put myself out there in terms of wanting to have those partnerships. I've had more success rather than going out on my own. And I think it's both feeling inspired, as Stephanie said, but also there's a level of accountability there that you may not have on your own.
Yeah.
And so, like, if I feel like, oh shoot, I have to get this done because Charlie's expecting it, I think you're more likely to get it done versus if you're on your own. Of course, I mean, those who are out on their own might be super ambitious and driven anyway, so maybe that's not so much a thing. But I do think that added accountability is a good part of it as well.
Well, you actually bring up a really good point, Zach, because most solopreneurs, the only person they have to answer to is ultimately themselves, unless they happen to have a board and whatnot. Which is one of the reasons why many people will hire coaches, right, to have somebody else there to hold them accountable. But now for us, it's a little bit different. And you and I, obviously, Zach, hold each other accountable as a team. This is one of Stephanie's greatest strengths because she's frequently saying, okay, guys, you said you were going to do what? Now, when did you say you were going to do it by? And then every week, can you update your progress? Can you update your scorecard? And there is that level of intentionality, the level of focus, and making sure that we're driving forward. So that definitely plays a really good part. That was a good point.
That's okay, Charlie. You can call me the grinder. That's fine.
But it is
okay.
it is
No, it's true.
one of
Yeah.
the areas where your strengths are one of my weaknesses, and I definitely feel that one of my strong points is that of being a visionary. The execution part, sometimes I need a little bit of a kick in the ass because I have to stay focused. I usually start and then I have 1,000 different projects going all at the same time. But you're very much like, no, get this one done first before we move to the next one. Get this one done first. But there's one other thing, Stephanie, that I'd like you to address. And this comes down to one of those hard conversations that you and I had back in Utah. You and I were asked to give a presentation and we're having breakfast. And I could tell the moment I sat down that you had something really important that you wanted to discuss. Do you remember what that was?
Well, I think it was about, if I remember correctly, that it was really about us because we were still, kind of in this genesis of this new company, and we're still building it. And so when like so many business owners and entrepreneurs, when you're starting something, you have your hands in everything.
Yeah.
And so we were getting to a place, and we began to have the conversation around how do we stay more in our own lane of our zone of genius.
Right.
And because you brought up something that, if I could digress a little bit, I think it
Please.
ties into what you're saying, which
Please.
for those of you that are familiar with Tony Robbins, he talks about three types of entrepreneurs. He talks about the artist, the entrepreneur, and the manager leader. And when I look at this trio of the three of us, I see, you're the entrepreneur, the visionary. You come with great ideas. You're the one coming to us with, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this new technology? And even though sometimes Zach and I are like, no more technology.
Yeah, this
it's
is why we work
service.
virtually. It's safer for me that way to work virtually.
But no, it's a good thing because, while some things haven't worked, other things have worked exceptionally well. And I don't think that those would have been introduced if it was just me. And I'm not going to speak for Zach, but I know if it was just me, I don't think they would have been introduced as much because that's not necessarily, where my area is. So I see you as the entrepreneur. And then Zach, I think you have a little bit of mix of a couple of them, but I see you very much as the artist, on the revenue side and the sales side, and mastering the business development for the company. And I am more of the manager leader, where we take the ideas and we talk about them, and I'm like, okay, let's put a plan together. How are we going to execute this? And so as you look at this, and just for the listeners out there, it's so important because for me at one time before I heard Tony talk about the three types of entrepreneurs, I kind of beat myself up a little bit because I wasn't the idea person. I would talk to people and they'd say, "Oh, I have this room full of ideas and these great things." And I thought, gosh, how come I just don't really have a lot of I don't have a room full of ideas. Why am I not that creative? And then when I learned and understood that there are different types of entrepreneurs, and that I was the manager leader, that I realized I had a great skill that I could bring to someone like you and to Zach, because Zach's come up with some really great ideas on how do we take that, formulate it, and then execute it.
Yeah.
And so, I think also just for listeners, if you've ever thought, well, why am I not this? Or maybe I should be more of that, is to really tap into your zone of genius, to really tap into, while it's good to stretch yourself and to expand on how to become better and to have better skill sets in certain areas, to also tap into what you're naturally talented at doing. And so that harkens back to the conversation that you were talking about in Utah, which is, Charlie was spreading himself very thin in all of these different areas. And, Charlie is a master marketer. You are really great at copy. You're really great at the messaging, and that front end element. And because you were spreading yourself thin in so many different areas, you and I began to talk a little bit about how do you stay more in your zone of genius, and then put more of that responsibility in some of those areas for Zach and myself, so we can carry the load on some of that and allow you to do what you're so great at, allow me to do what I'm so great at, allow Zach to do what he's so great at, and to have a little bit more definition to what that is, and how we can create more value as as partners in the organization. So that's what I remember of the conversation. You might have a different opinion.
No, it was right. And it's about that level of accountability that I believe Zach was talking about earlier. And it was about us all being different, about the different levels of accountability. And were you to say, look, here's the deal. For us to go from where we're at right now to the next level, you got to stay in your zone of genius. You got to stay, out of my lane and into your lane. Let me do what I'm great at. You stay at where you're great at. We're gonna let Zach continue where he's great at. Everybody has their own lane. We need to stay there. That's why we formed this partnership, to get to that next level. So get out of my damn lane. and that,
You sound so mean.
Well, they should have seen you, Stephanie.
There's a little grit behind this smile. No.
No, but I mean, it was great. It was great, So Zach, the motto of our company is that of together we're better. And in many ways that has formed where we formed together as a team, and all three of us are working on particular projects. Other times it's when we're picking up maybe the slack for somebody, or we're just trying to make somebody else that much better. What does that mean to you, and how has that played a role in the company, just this idea of together we're better?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of everything you've already mentioned so far, right? I think individually, I think it takes a certain type of person to succeed within a startup, within a business, within this sort of industry that we're in, and then collectively you add those parts up. I think it's greater than the individual strengths. So I think you see that in real time in what we're doing. In that I think if we split up each role, then we add that up, then that makes it's kind of like having a recipe or a pie, and if you leave out like butter or something, it's not going to be as great, or it's not going to be good, right? It's just going to not be good. So I think it's kind of like that, right? In that together we're better. It's leaning into that. It's recognizing, when you need help, when you may not need help, what you're great at, what you should probably delegate. I think that's a big challenge for a lot of not only us, but for everyone we speak to, right? We probably speak to hundreds of business owners every year. I think that's a big part of it, is knowing when to let go, when to delegate, when to know it's not, that's not you, that's maybe best for someone else, and that, you're going to be better off allowing someone else to step into that role and get out of the way. And then I think it's also just recognizing when you need help, that, if, Charlie can guide me here, or Stephanie can help me here, then, I can do that job that much better, something like that. So it can mean a number of different things, right? It can go in so many different directions, but does that answer your question? Is that helpful?
Yeah, it does. And you did bring up a good point that, together we're better is not just making one another better and better performers. It is that the sum combined is greater than, so it's more like a multiplication factor. The three of us are multiplied, not 1 + 1 + 1.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to mention is that
Greater than the whole.
it may not be as prevalent amongst owners if the three of you are launching a business, because you should be working in the same direction, should be working towards the same goal. But I think the motto can be really powerful, not only just for that sort of partnership, but you also see for partnerships for some of our partners that we have, that that we they're totally different companies, totally different brands, and together we can deliver a better result for everyone involved, because we're better together, right? And then I also think, like, for sales teams, it's not uncommon for sales teams to be competitive, and that's good. You want to have that competition, but also people can step on each other's toes, and then it can lead to where it's not better, right? You're actually detracting from each other. So I think adopting that sort of that slogan or that motto isn't just beneficial for a couple of people trying to start a business, but it's beneficial for basically all walks of life, if you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. When because in working with different companies or whatnot, where I see partnerships fail is when there's a lot of horse trading. And what I mean by that, there's a horse trading of, oh, he only put in 40 hours this week, so I'm only going to put in 40 hours this week. Or, she's not working the weekend, so I'm not going to work the weekend. Or I did this 2 weeks ago, so now it's her turn, or now it's his turn, or whatnot. And you tend to see a lot of tit for tat, versus, and again, this is much like a marriage. When you look at those that really are thriving and succeeding, it's when one partner or one spouse is anticipating one another's needs. And that's one of the things that really I've admired a lot about working with Zach and Stephanie, is that there's always this try to anticipation of somebody else's needs in a way, so that so much of what we've done together has gone unspoken. If Stephanie needs a hand, Zach will often offer to jump in and be like, "Let me take care of this for hey, Stephanie. You're so busy right now. I got a little bit of time. Let me jump in and let me support you there." And it's just that constant anticipation of one another's needs and stepping in and helping one another out. And that has really been not something that was really ever intentionally built into the company, but it's something that we've learned as being one of the most valuable attributes of working together, is that there's this constant way, how can I contribute more to you, and so forth. And I think a nice example of that, Stephanie, is when you took off recently on vacation, and it was the first time you had ever really disconnected from your business. And was it 14 years? Is that what you said?
Like
Something like that?
literally like 2 decades. I mean, it's been a really long time since I just completely unplugged at the level that I did.
And you unplugging was as simple as, you know, I'm going to take off for, a week. And then Zach and myself, you knew that you could trust your partners and saying, okay, I get, everything's going to be gone. And by the time you came back, hopefully things worked pretty seamlessly, being able to get back into those
Yeah.
shoes.
And Nothing's ever simple when you try to unplug for a week, ever.
Right.
But the preparation of that and knowing that I had, the team there to step in, and it brought to light too. And I think, again, this goes back, what I learned, I just got back this week. What it really brought to light for me, and again, this is for everybody listening, is that I think as entrepreneurs, we have a very difficult, I said 2 decades, right? We have a very difficult time fully unplugging. And I had my out of office assistant, I had my assistant responding to certain things. Charlie, you offered to do things. Zach, you offered to do things. And so I covered all bases. But for us to unplug, we are not robots. We're not machines. We're human beings that need to have that time to replenish. And my only regret is I haven't done that sooner. And I'm going to encourage that all of us, when we go to take a week vacation, take the vacation. Don't sit there and go, well, I'm going to do a little coaching here, or I'm going to have a meeting here, or, unless it's a 911. I think it's really important. So when we do come back, we are replenished. We're ready to jump in and dive in, and we're not running on an empty bucket, which I think a lot of times we get where burnout comes in, and we're feeling like we're burning the candle at both ends, which sometimes that just has to happen, right? Sometimes we have to burn the candle at both ends. Sometimes we have to just lean in and make things happen. But that's why that replenishing, and that nurturing is so, so important. And I just so thankful that I had the opportunity to do that, and I will absolutely have your guys' back when you go on your vacations.
Which Zach, Stephanie threw down the gauntlet. And when she came back, she said to me, here's the deal. At least once a year, every one of us at some point has to go away for at least a week and commit to completely unplugging. No emails, no nothing, completely unplugging. Now I can unplug, but usually I'm like checking my email here and there, or
Always. Yeah, you're
sending
always.
boxers or whatever it is, right? That's my version of
Yeah.
unplugging. But Zach, you're next up on the docket. You're going to be taking off Maui, I believe it is, some point soon. So you're next up on the docket. It's whether or not you're willing to step up to the challenge and completely disconnect.
Yeah,
And
I'm gonna be on the
Well,
beach. I will not. I don't even know where my phone will be.
good.
It'll be like
Yes.
in a suitcase or something. I'm not even sure, but I'm not bringing it with me.
Perfect. I did not bring my computer. It was the weirdest thing, but because my husband and I both went, it was a milestone birthday that we were celebrating, and he said we are not bringing our computers this time, and it was the weirdest thing as we were going through security at the
Yeah.
airport, because we're like, wow, this is so easy. We had one little bag and going
Yeah,
through
that
and
is funny. I don't think
on.
I've ever gone through security without a laptop.
I felt a little naked,
That is
admittedly. I
interesting.
did. Yeah, but it was
So
very great. It
actually,
was really
just real
great.
quick, I kind of want to make another point about like a partnership. So, as we're growing, we're, experiencing, those growth pains. We brought on, a few people where our team is growing, et cetera. And, very grateful for that, obviously. But I think, it's really hard, right? And I think I've also learned that, and we help others, a lot of other companies scale and grow, and scale being that that key word there. And I think one thing that the partnership also is beneficial or useful is aiding or helping in that scale, right? Because I think you start to realize that you have to have those systems and those processes in place. They have to have all these things, and it's a little bit easier to do so when you have your partners to lean on to then help develop those types of systems, and everybody can kind of own a certain area. And then I see the frustration and the difficulty of when I'm working with others who are basically alone at the top, right? I hear that a lot. And they're trying to grow and scale, and they're like wondering why their employees don't quite get it, or they're not the same or whatever. But it's easier, I think, to do all of that. When you empower your team, there's a lot of things that go into it, but partnership is also a part of that as well. And so not only just starting a business does that make it, as you already mentioned, Charlie, the statistics for getting to the first million. But then going beyond that, I think having that team is really important. And I don't know if it's possible, to continue beyond a certain point without partners, without a great team around you, without, the right people in the right place.
So that's a good segue, Zach. I just had lunch with a client of ours, and one of the questions that he asked me is, does it make sense to take on a partner when you're already generating multiples of millions of dollars? And my response back to him was, do you have anybody else in the company that has taken on that ownership mentality? And or that do they have the employee team member mentality? The ownership mentality oftentimes is one of like, I they're going to take this company all the way down to the field goal, right? All the way down to the end, versus the employee mentality is they're still kind of watching out for themselves first. And I totally understand that and get that. There's no right or wrong either way you look at it. And I said, which part of the company is really critical to you that if for whatever reason that part of the company ended up, the team lead in that company ended up going somewhere else, that will cause the most amount of pain? And he mentioned it. And he said, well, coincidentally, that particular role, that member of the team has asked me if they could invest in and now get equity and become a partner. And I said to him, look, there's a certain level of trust with partnerships. There's a lot that we can stress about. There's a lot that could keep us up at night. But each one of the pieces and parts of the business that is being owned and managed by one of my partners, that's one thing that I never have to worry about. That I can go to bed and I can stress about one thing, but I never have to stress about what they're working on, because I know 100% that they're as equally committed as I am. And for that reason, giving that equity, having a partner, being somebody that I know is in it with me, pays itself off in spades. And so there's a reason why companies at some point may decide to give equity to employees, key salespeople, key, managers, executives, all that other jazz, because eventually at some point you realize they become indispensable to the organization. And when you can get people on the same team that are all committed to taking it all the way to whatever that dream is, that exit, that IPO, that acquisition, whatever, it means a lot. It definitely means a lot. So I think one thing that was also just mentioned that I want to bring up is the importance of unplugging, like both Zach and Stephanie just mentioned. Maybe not for the reason that you might think. It's to make sure that the company isn't dependent on any one person. And even though we're partners and we have each other's back and we're not going anywhere, the same breath, this is a company, and we have to make sure that the company is as robust as possible. And one of the things that we saw in 2020 is how many unexpected events could end up happening that could completely just derail the company. I mean, God forbid, I know myself, my wife gives me heck every time I get a man cold. I mean, I'm out and about, right? But, or out and, on my back. But, God forbid that I got something like COVID or whatnot. You could see how many people were removed from their business for a long period of time. And we've got colleagues and friends that had spent decades building their business. And because they never made sure that there were systems, processes, checks and balances in place that could allow the company to run without them, while the company thrived and 2020 didn't take the company down, it was them getting coronavirus and unexpectedly in the hospital for 3 weeks, that when by the time they came out, they realized, what the heck, my company is gone. So while yes, that's a great idea to unplug, for the sake of saying, I'm going to unplug to recharge my own batteries. It's also for the health, the longevity, and the robustness of the organization to unplug so you could see, can this company run without me? And if it can, where are the fractures in the hull of our boat that we need to repair and adjust and improve upon, so that should I want to take 2 weeks next year, that I can take 2 weeks and know that I can come back, not just the company where it was when I left it, but what needs to happen so that when I come back, the company is even better off 2 weeks from now than where I'm at right now. And that is something that is definitely really, really important when you think about unplugging.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I really didn't think of it that way, but when you do step away, you do identify if there's any holes. I don't know if you guys noticed anything when I was gone, but I think we have so many opportunities of just continuing to improve, even if you have the right processes in place. Things change, things evolve, and you have to constantly be looking at is that running efficiently? Is it supporting us? Is it supporting our clients? And yeah, when you leave, that becomes really apparent.
I think it was like when you left, there was definitely, you could feel the hole. Like you could feel that you were gone, right? Um, but the company still thrived, during your absence. But the question is, how long could it have continued to thrive before some of those systems and processes that maybe you have either, just have that unconscious incompetence around, or that you've, been doing it that just haven't documented or whatnot, at what point, would we all of a sudden hit a wall and be like, like, what do we do now? But these are just
Well, I
nice.
want you to need me just a little.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we need you a lot. We need you a lot.
That's a
So,
really good point.
yeah. So I know we are kind of pushing the clock here. I do want
Has it
to,
really been an hour?
well, yeah, it's almost been an hour, if you can believe
Oh,
that.
wow. Wow.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
I guess.
You know, one of the other things that I want to bring up as well in terms of partnerships is, we've talked about getting our work done. We've talked about helping people, get better and whatnot. But we haven't really talked about how do you, provide different feedback to your team to make sure everybody is operating at best self. And, if something's happening and, you're upset or uncomfortable or whatnot, like, do you keep it bottled? Do you share it with your team? And that bit of communication. And I know we talk about print. We talk about that being an assessment tool that we use, and we're always committed at being best self. Even though I've been practicing it for the last decade, I am the largest offender, meaning I trigger more people on the team than anybody else on the team. Totally inadvertently, of course, but it's my ADHD at full speed that sometimes I can do something where it's inadvertently triggering people. Zach, you've been awesome at being able to deliver the feedback in the way that also has been received well. And, not only feedback in terms of, hey, man, like, I was inadvertently, triggered, but you've also delivered feedback where you've maybe seen the way potentially I've communicated with another team member and been aware, saying, hey, Charlie, I think it could have been received wrong, or here's how you can become a better leader, or, so you and I have worked together for a while. It wasn't always this way, but you've learned, and maybe I've learned and whatnot, in terms of how to best communicate with one another. What kind of light can you shine on this part of the conversation?
Good question. In what way?
Well, I know in the very beginning, you actually, your print is one that you offer some great advice. And In many cases, I didn't take the advice, and it cost us millions, actually, to be frank, by me being more headstrong and not paying attention. And I know it would trigger you. And then at some point, I think you just kind of put your foot down and you're like, hey, look, are you going to listen to me or not? Like, just, I've been saying this for a little while, just finally, like, pay attention. And we made some changes, and sure enough, I think one of my bigger regrets is that it cost us millions and not paying attention to that advice. But you've just, I guess, communication with how you communicate with the team, why communication is important. Um,
Yeah, I mean that's a difficult topic or conversation, or like thing to elaborate on, given that I would guess most people who are launching a venture of any sort are going to feel pretty confident in their abilities or their conviction, and feel like, I know what I'm talking about. I also think, like our relationship was a little different in that you had been the successful individual for a long period of time and had made quite a bit of money, in a past life by yourself, right? In a couple different roles. So perhaps it was just kind of adjusting to working with someone else, and that could be a part of it. But I think it's, both strong-willed individuals. Both of us thought we were right, and I think we both were. It was just kind of reaching that in between. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say beyond that, other than I think it just took some time to figure that out. And as you mentioned earlier, I think people do tend to want to partner with people who are just like them, and then if everyone's kind of agreeing on the same thing, I think that's problematic, right? That's kind of dangerous when everyone's just on the same page and it's like, yep, and then like, I think you need to have some sort of component where someone's like, actually, I don't think so. Let's take a step back. And so there's that, but also, not having this huge ego, which, anyone who says like entrepreneurs don't have an ego, like I think they're lying. I think every entrepreneur has some sort of ego, but being willing to put that aside to recognize that it's not just about like what's right in front of you, it's what's down the road. And I know that at times I think you were like, all right, man, we'll do this because I know you're pissed off and I know you're mad and we'll see how this goes. And you were more like worried about our long-term future of us working together versus like, all right, I'll let this like kid have this sort of thing, and we'll see if it works or not. And then it would work sometimes, other times it wouldn't, right? Like it's not always perfect. And then I think those moments were kind of like, okay, well, maybe he had a point, like I think it was kind of a learning experience. But I think you're always mindful of that early on, of keeping that long view, right? And I think that's important. I know in my past company, and I've actually worked with a couple others too, more as an advisor. And I think both of you and I were advisor for one company together. And people were so like, holding on to everything they had and like, coming to arms and not willing to budge on like the smallest of things, and not realizing that like, fighting over a headline on a website is not worth it. And it's, it's not worth the overall partnership down the road. I'm probably just ranting at this point, but does that make sense, or is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
go ahead, Stephanie.
I just wanted to add this is such a good conversation, because you're right. As leaders, we all have egos, and everybody has an ego, but especially business owners and entrepreneurs for sure. And when, and this is for everybody to really think about how they handle conflict in a business. Because when you have your own personal agenda, or you're confronted with your, what you think is right, and you're confronted with another idea, it's our ego that gets in the way. It's our ego that's getting bruised. And that's when we tend to dig in our heels and go, no, I'm right. And, I want to be heard, and I want to be the one that wins this argument. And when you come in wanting to win something, usually both parties end up losing,
Yeah.
because even if you win it, the person that you're working with, when we're talking specifically about partnerships, they don't feel heard, they feel disregarded, they feel disrespected. And even though they may go your way, it adds a little crack in that relationship, and it affects the trust. I mean, when you think of, we talk about this a lot with selling, is rapport, and that the ultimate definition of rapport is that they like you, they trust you, they respect you. And I think it goes right to our relationship as partners. And when you're working with somebody peer to peer and you're running a company, one of the things that I think makes us super effective is we have really great rapport with one another. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you guys. I enjoy working with you guys, and I very much trust you both.
Mhm.
And you look at that like a three-legged stool. So, you know, as a leader of a company, whether you like it or not, you are going to be the example that people follow in your organization. So if you're dictatorial, or if you're not a good listener, and people then don't feel heard, and you're breeding a lack of trust, then it starts to break down the culture of the organization. And so as leaders, one of the thing, and I have to really tip my hat to Charlie, is as much as Charlie is like, I'm the biggest person that, that triggers the company. I would tend to disagree a little bit. And the reason I say that is because you take ownership so quickly. This is a very, you do have, you have an ego in a good way, but you also check your ego at the door. And I think it's so important as leaders to be able to recognize, hey, I might be triggered, this might be going on for me, and to be able to effectively communicate that. And I think, this is where you talk about IQ versus EQ.
Mhm.
And I think you have very strong EQ. You recognize, you're aware, you're insightful. And I think it's really powerful when you can have a leader who has a high EQ to be able to recognize, when they're digging in their heels, because at the end of the day, the more that we can just be real and honest and transparent with each other, and be able to talk through those things and be willing, like Zach said, God forbid that we all just easily agreed on everything. How boring would that be? And how much, how much would our company really grow
Sure.
if we just instantly agreed to everything? So even though we've had colorful conversations around things, and we then came to an agreement, but it's reciprocal. You have to have both parties being willing to come to the table, to be able to listen to each other, and not have their egos laid out to so they shut down, but rather listen for the greater good of the organization rather than their own personal agendas.
And it's funny, I think, to the point that you made, a lot of the EQ and whatnot, that was something that was only developed uh, through many, many, many humble pies, right? It's after you face it's through years of experience and quickly realizing that, you know, how many times that somebody else has brought something to the table that was far, more insightful, whatever that might be, or where you made wrong decisions, or if you had listened to somebody else or whatnot. And I think EQ also does come with a lot of experience. It's like why teenagers think that, they're completely invincible, right? Because they haven't developed the EQ, because they don't have the experience to know, you know,
Mm-hmm.
one, to make a right decision or a wrong decision. But then over time you start to develop that, and we all have that to some level. So which is really great. So I know we're kind of, again, did you
Just real quick, interestingly, in kind of preparing for this, I looked up some stats that you mentioned one earlier, but I looked it up. I don't have it in front of me, so I might get this wrong, but I think the average age of entrepreneurs when they start a successful business was like age 44 to like 52. And I
Wow.
think 43 to 52. And I think it is kind of like along the lines of what you said, right? I think when you're like 20, 21, 20, in the 20s, even probably 30s, you feel like you just know everything. And yeah, that probably leads to, some of the conflict or issues that you mentioned before. And then, in those types of settings where, let's say it's not even in business, but, if you're working on like a volunteer group that I've been in, if you're not allowing someone to kind of voice their opinions, they're just not going to bring them back, right? They're not going to keep coming back because they just feel, like they're not going to be heard, they're not going to be listened to, they don't have that avenue. And so then it really damages partnerships. And that's kind of how I've experienced that in past businesses as well. And then if you're talking to your spouse, your wife, your partner, and then but you're not actually doing that with your partners in the business, and it just goes downhill. So definitely have seen that before as well.
Yeah,
such a good point.
That is a very good point. So kind of to wrap up this episode, I want to bring up some of the highlights that we discussed. And, one of those was being that partnerships are much like that of a marriage. And the best marriages often is opposite attract. You align with values, but what actually brings you together are the differences. And so your strengths is somebody else's weaknesses and so forth. A good partnership is not when you try to find somebody that's exactly like you, because if you do that, just, one of you is not necessary. The other components of a partnership that we talked about is the importance in staying in your own lanes. You became, together because of your differences, understanding those strengths and clearly articulating that here's my roles and responsibilities in the organization and so forth. So in a sense, we're all micro business owners inside of a larger business. We all have our own sort of roles and responsibilities, and then we come together at the top to discuss that. It's the holding each other accountable and making sure that there's a plan laid out, ideally weekly, and what you can hold each other accountable from one moment to the next. It's putting aside the horse trading, no more tit for tats, and anticipating one another's needs so that you can become a more valuable partner to the team. It's about making sure that as a team, that not any one person is completely, the business is not dependent on any one person, and that it allows and affords you the ability to go on a vacation, whether it's a 1 week or a 2 week, to build the robustness inside of an organization. And like any successful relationship, it all comes down to communication, the confidence and the comfort and the conditions put in place to allow the tough conversations to happen, to welcome feedback, to listen and be receptive to, whatever might come your way, so that you don't just have the ego of believing that you're always right, that you have more of that EQ, more of the emotional intelligence to understand that everybody has a unique gift, everybody has a unique perspective, that there's value in every conversation that you can have. Because if you continue to shut down somebody else's opinion, you might not get it the next time you actually really need it. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Stephanie or Zach, to what we just discussed?
No, I just love you guys.
The feeling is absolutely mutual. And for me, I've been in business all my life, never had a traditional real job, and forming a partnership with Zach and Stephanie, I could argue, if it's not the best decision I've ever made, it's right up there as one of the best decisions I've ever made. It's been a phenomenal experience. And for all our listeners here, if I wish one thing upon you over this recording, it's that you're able to find a partner, an advisor, a mentor, a board member, whatever that might be, that can be as special and impactful for you as both Stephanie and Zach have been for me and our company.
Thanks, John.
So that wraps up today's 100th episode of the Beyond
Woohoo!
Seven Figures podcast.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We'll have to see what we're going to do for our 200th episode. And coincidentally, which is funny enough, And it's actually kind of funny that we bring this up right now. The podcast was something that Zach, one of the things that Zach had been saying to me for a while. Hey, you know what? You should have a podcast. You should have a podcast.
Well done.
And this was one of those moments where I'm like, you know what, man, maybe you're right. And so here we are 100 episodes later, and there we have it. So
the takeaway of this podcast is listen to Zach. That's it. Summed it up for everyone. Everyone listening.
Can we edit that out, Mr. Producer? That was funny. All right, guys. Hey, that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. For more tips, strategies to take your business beyond seven figures, please be sure to visit us over at PredictableProfits.com. Again, that is PredictableProfits.com. So this is Charles Gaudette with my friends and business partners, Stephanie Vaughan and Zach Burkes. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in another episode.